other. And then within that region, you have a focus. The things that influence your gaze. So you're supposed to be led by the archive. But you're not always going to be led by the archive.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, so you do, I don't want to say the impossible, but you come back from losing pretty much all your data to
and do it over.
coming, and you did all of this in how many years?
So a PhD program in the US is 5 years. I finished in 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then you decided, but wait.
So I came back home.
Okay.
I came back home. I was on study leave. I returned to the Institute of Jamaica. And that's also funny because I returned at a time when the government was starting to restrict study leave because people were not fulfilling their bond, right? However, like most cultural sector organizations, people stay in their jobs for a very long time and there is very limited opportunity for mobility. And I was like, let me move on. Let me give, why am I sitting here? You know, let me move on. And so I would have graduated 2013. I got a postdoc at Smith College to start August 2013. So Smith College in Massachusetts in the Department of African American Studies. And it was a 2-year postdoc. So I moved back to the US. And I loved Smith. It's a great space. It's a great teaching environment. I hated the cold. I am a tropical baby through and through. But I didn't enjoy academia. And in the US, it's very, I don't want to be misquoted, but in layman's terms, academia can be very fad-like, meaning that there are these surges of specific areas that study that everybody's hiring in that field. And I did world history, but I did world history just at the point where world history was no longer a thing. They were hiring Atlantic world people. That is the first thing, so it's fads. The second thing is that if you're not a slavery historian or a historian that works in Haiti, DR, Puerto Rico, Cuba, then the US market does not, in my mind, and it may have evolved now, at that time rather, was not very receptive to alternate histories in my mind, or you had to contort yourself. I was not interested in contorting myself. I was not interested, and I got interviews, but I realized that just being a full-time academic in that very traditional sense of the word didn't work for me. And at the end of my 2 years, I was like, oh wait, my visa period is up. It's time for me to go back home. And I returned again to the Institute of Jamaica in Liberty Hall, the Legacy of Marcus Garvey. And I had an amazing mentor in Donna McFarlane. And Donna was a developmental economist who decided to become a museologist. And so she left working in that area and became the first director curator of Liberty Hall. And, I'd come back and Donna was like, so are you gonna stay? And I was like, well, I don't know. I should be on the job market. I need a job, blah, 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 blah. And she was like, you don't have to go back. She was like, you can create any life you want here.
Big facts.
Yeah, she's like, you can create, and she...
Did you believe it at the time? Did you see what she meant?
No, but she spent time helping me rethink what was happening. I didn't enjoy the big American Historical Association conf. I hated them. There were like 600 people. There, I just, it's like working in a sea. I never, you probably could come out with one or two people, but if you're not fluent in the ways how African Americans or Europe or American academia functions, then it doesn't work. And so I was like, okay, well, part of my job as research officer was to make local connections. And so I started doing stuff where I would be with Museums Association of the Caribbean, Association for the Worldwide Study of African Diaspora, and all of those things. About a year in, 2 years in, Donna got sick. And she was like, okay, well, you're going to be acting director. And I was supposed to be acting director for 6 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. I became acting director for over a year until she died. And but in that time, my idea about how I could function, and also while I was there, she got funding from TF to redesign Liberty Hall. And
that's the Tourism Foundation?
Yeah, the Tourism Enhancement Fund. And that was also a transformative experience, because I think the problem for me was that I didn't only want to do history alone. And working in the museum requires you to think of education programming, grant funding writing, maintenance, human resource stuff, administration. So it became practice, so the history is the content, but there are a set of structures that you have to put in to ensure that that content is sustainable. And you don't learn that in the classroom. You learn that on the job, right?
Do you think she realized you wanted to be like a museologist, or that you were...
Donna tries to convert everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, she's one of those, she's a campaigner, right? Everybody who's ever worked with Donna will tell you that. She's a campaigner, but she saw herself, for me at least, she saw herself as a mentor. And she, I remember she stopped by the office one day while she was sick, and I had not yet transitioned from the research officer's chair to the director's chair. And she came in through the office door and she was like, why are you in that chair? And I'm like, well, I'm working. She's like, you are the acting director. You need to put on your big woman drawers.
Right.
And you need to go sit in the director chair. You're going to embody director. You're going to be director. And you're going to do everything, even if you don't know how to do it. You are going to be.
How old are you at that time?
Probably 33, 34 maybe. Yeah. So Donna was just like, no, you are absolutely doing this.
Yeah.
And I expect you to do this. And, she was on me there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love good mentors. It sounds like you've had great mentorship.
I've had amazing mentors. And you know what? I think very often, for a long time, I thought of a mentor, somebody that was assigned to you, kind of like this.
No, but they took up themselves.
This person's gonna guide you in whatever way, and I think it's upon reflection. Well, probably because so many of my mentors have transitioned. It's upon reflection that I realize it's actually, I would say, after their passing that I've thought of them as mentors, because when I look back on what they've done, there's this consistent guiding hand, and they guided me based on their strengths, and they allowed me to grow. Well, my first boss hasn't died. He's still there around, but he's still around. He's still working with me. But I think probably after Donna especially, that there is when I look back on my development, I see the ways in which their intervention has propelled me forward.
Sure.
And I think at no point did they actually tell me I needed to be different. They trusted me to grow in my own ways.
Reminds me of how your parents were as well, in a
Yes,
sense.
yes, absolutely. They've trusted me to figure it out, to land on my feet, and they always celebrate my successes. So I would say yes. So Donna was really the person who taught me to carve out my own space, and I recognize that I've carved out a space for myself that is really an in-between space.
What does that mean?
So, a lot of times when we go to school, we're almost kind of encouraged to end up in a career path.
Yeah.
But this is not a path that is standard.
Right.
You happen upon a path like this. This is not, people don't
Or design it.
Or design it. People don't tell you about it in school.
Yeah.
Jamaica is not, the Caribbean most is not a museum-going society. So you would never think to yourself that you would become a museum curator as a profession.
You know what? That makes me so sad. Well, it makes me sad to say we're not a museum. It's true, but
we're evolving,
We are.
We are evolving, and more people are looking for spaces like museum and public heritage and tours. That's why Kingston Creative has taken off in the way that it has. But, that's for art.
True.
It doesn't translate to all areas of museums functioning. But I think that's changing. I think it's changing, but it's going to be a slow and gradual change.
Yeah.
And increasingly, as professionals, so like my colleagues and I, the Caribbean Heritage Consultants, we're regional based. I think the gaze is more regional now, because there are particular structures that not only have to happen at a national level, but it also has to happen regionally.
Sure.
To allow for more effective work in museums and heritage preservation and that kind of thing.
Sure. So what would you say your goals are as an organization?
So our goals are the first is to provide professional support, regional professional support. Most governments go to the US and go to the UK and go outside of the region looking for specialists. But we offer a familiarity about the region around issues of heritage preservation, archaeological impact assessments, museum exhibition design, heritage policy, World Heritage Conventions. That really is about working in support with local organizations and governments so that we can put in the best infrastructure possible for sustainable heritage preservation. Development and sustainability are always issues that I think that are up for discussion, but that's ultimately our goal. Yeah.
Yes, and just curious, how does one do history sustainably? Like, how does one?
How do you do it sustainably?
Yeah, it feels very sometimes, right? Especially because of, in order to document, science can be like that too. I don't know if you feel like that. I know you had the galley wasp return recently, right? It can feel like a lot of destruction sometimes because you have to collect a sample or a specimen or to record this history. You have to kind of go in there where you don't really belong sometimes and kind of, I don't know if it feels like that for history. It feels like that for science. I have a science perspective.
Right. Okay. Well, all right. So it's not. So, all right. Let's use museums rather. Okay. Than history. So when you think of like science, there's a way. So museums and archaeological excavations and that kind of thing, they are invasive in that you have to go into the ground, or you collect an object, you have to preserve it, and you create an artificial environment for preservation. You have to dig, you have to photograph, you have to document, and so on. There is a component of invasiveness, but very often it's very regulated, right? And even collection practices in the natural sciences have evolved, and they're grounded by ethics and ethical practice and that kind of thing. So one of the challenges, and this is something that colleagues and I have been working through, one of the challenges is the tension between development and a sustained practice, right? Because the region operates without, and I'm speaking specifically about the Anglophone Caribbean here, because the region functions with a deficit of policy, right, and a deficit of practices, and an issue around adherence to rules and regulations that may exist, very often heritage gets shafted, even when they're doing a sustainable practice, which is that probably you're going to use solar power, or maybe you're going to do rainwater harvesting, or any of those things. There is a disconnect, and it's because we see, use the term modernity, we see development as being something radically different from the old. And very often that radical difference is actually very destructive. So it's things like building on what we know of historic grave sites. So let's think about the Fontana at Waterloo, that's built on mass graves, right? From, I think it's one of the cholera epidemics. Or when you, remove a bridge that would have been built by slave labor, right? And you create this beautiful, or you think about plantations. Plantations are actually destructive created landscapes. So when you think about Rose Hall Estate, that is a created landscape. But you can stand up at Rose Hall and look out to the sea, and it's gorgeous. But it's a curated it's a created landscape.
Right. They needed to be able to see out.
You needed to be able to see out the sea, but you also need to be able to look down at your plantation.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
the sea.
yeah.
The sea was a bonus.
Yeah, you have to look out down on your plantation, which is why plantation houses are very often built on the elevation, and they're big to reflect grandeur. The Gallowasp case was that the Gallowasp was eradicated because of the expansion of sugar economy, right? So the problem is these tensions there are multiple histories that require elements of preservation. It's the absence of policy, or the ways in which people see preservation as benefiting them, that results very often in its destruction.
Understood.
Yeah.
And so who balances, I could ask questions forever. I'm going to stop because I need to ask you advice things, because we're coming to the end. And we haven't even spoken about you being at the university yet. So how do you balance when there are multiple histories at play and there is some heritage and preservation to them, right? So a great house has its imperial history and where that's coming from, but then the enslaved had their history and whatever products came from it, and that particular estate and the lore.
Right. So it is okay. So a lot of the recommendations are, and I want to say that we're still working this out. It's not, and a lot of museum and heritage work is work in the now, right? It's where very often putting in a program, rethinking, going back, rethinking, going back, because there's always a forward-facing component to that work. So a lot of it is, for example, okay, I can jump into UWI, for example.
Sure.
So University of the West Indies is on Mona Estate, with sections of it being Papine Estate, right? And so throughout the campus, what you actually see are these historic structures. So the aqueduct, right? So the aqueduct would have brought water from the Hope River to Mona, Hope Estate, and Papine Estate. And Hope Estate takes in from UTech, Hope Gardens, JC, all of the area that you're calling Hope Road, into the residential community. That's all part of Hope Estate. So it was a massive estate, right? Mona Estate was also fairly big as well. Now, what Mona campus has done is, in many ways, and I won't say it's been done perfectly, but the preservation and the signage throughout the campus, the obelisks, for example, at the Faculty of Medicine, where when they built it, they realized that it was a burial ground. They had put in obelisks with names of the men and women on Papine Estate, I think for 1831 or 1380, I can't remember, 31 I think it was. And so there are these efforts throughout to signpost what are in essence historical ruins, to say to people that these ruins are here and this is a part of the history. So if you think about the Mona campus estate, it is it's the past and the present coexisting as one. That said, there are even challenges there. Because it's not just the plantation era, it's also Gibraltar camp era, which is the era of when Mona was the site of Gibraltar and Malta evacuees during World War II.
Is that why there's Gibraltar Way?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
The entire thing was Gibraltar camp.
I am just
no,
sorry.
That's okay. So the buildings that date back to the Gibraltar camp era, Old Dramatic Theatre.
Okay.
Right? And Old Library.
Okay.
Those buildings date back to the Gibraltar camp era. But all of that area in front of SCR, which was where you had the first classrooms, all of that was Gibraltar camp. So the UWI site, the UCWI site, was chosen because it already had Gibraltar camp housing on it. So the first 33 students lived in Gibraltar housing. And then as the campus built up and expanded, they moved from Gibraltar into Chancellor and Irving.
Oh, very nice. Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So, okay, you're at the UWI
I'm at
Museum.
UWI, yeah.
And you are, what does it entail being a curator at the University Museum?
Okay.
And how is it different from other museums?
Okay, so it's a small museum. That's the first thing. It has a team of 2. The institute where I was coming from was a team, like 10 people. You had different people doing different specializations. So somebody would be the keeper of the collection, somebody would be the education officer, you had the curator, the assistant curator, the person who does the construction, you have the graphic artist, the administrator, and that kind of thing. So you have a team. Here, I wear all the hats of specialization, which is virtually impossible, but you know, you win some, you lose some. So it's actually a different history for me to learn. So I had to learn this history, actually. When you attend UWI, you don't really get a history of the UWI, right? So it was a history that I had to learn. So I knew the history of the development of the history department. I didn't know, and some of the campus, right? But I actually had to learn a whole new history, and a lot of it also, it functions as a history museum. So the mission is really the history of the university in the region that it serves.
I see.
And the university has 5 campuses now. It's in about 24, 27 countries through Global Campus. And it has a very long history. The evolution of the university, even though it was established in 1948, is really a reflection of the ways in which the region has changed. And its fundamental responsibility is to fulfill the needs of the region. So the Faculty of Medicine, which is the first, is literally part of the reason why we have such good health outcomes regionally. So they train at the UWI and then they go back into their countries to implement the training. So being here has actually shifted my interests a little bit. So I started in 2019 and then COVID-19 hit 6 months later. And COVID-19 is a very interesting time for museums because museums are forward-facing. They part of the work that they do is for visitors to come. And we were in lockdown. The country was in complete lockdown. And the campus was empty. And I had to learn how to become digital and think about how do I adequately collect, document, and exhibit COVID-19? And so coming out of that project, because I still came into work, right? We photographed the emptiness of the Mona campus landscape and called it Surviving COVID-19. And Mona campus is the largest of all the campuses. I think at one point it had about 19,000 persons on the campus. And it went from having 19,000 people on campus to nothing. Come zilch. And there was a way of thinking, yes, COVID had significant economic impact, significant mental health impact, significant health impact. It affected education, and some people thrived, but a lot of people did not thrive in COVID. And so, you know, but the place also became empty in a lot of ways. And so we did that work. And so what has now happened is that my focus has shifted towards contemporary collecting as a way, how do we represent the present? And in a lot of ways, representing the present also helps to strengthen students' relationships with the museum. The other thing was that I ended up doing repatriation, which is the repatriation of the galley wasp under the UE Glasgow MOU. And that required me to become like a science person. that was a bit much, but very useful. And really had me start thinking about things like risk, policy, how do we collect, why do we collect, what do we repatriate, when do we repatriate, strategic repatriation. So I've had to think about the work that I do in a very strategic way, because the UE audience requires a different type of engagement from an IOJ audience, which starts out being heavily school based, early childhood, primary school, secondary school. The tertiary school environment is a totally different one, and in many ways this museum has functioned differently from other university museums. They kind of, a lot of university museums emerge out of collections already happening, already existing. The collection for this museum was created and pulled out of the history of the university. And over time, it's constantly evolving, you know. So it requires a kind of rethinking in a different way. It's a small team, so that comes with that. So I've had to do all areas. I mean, well, working in the museum in the Caribbean, you do all areas. Everybody paints, everybody hammers, you learn how to use a drill, you work with the conservators, you know how to do basic kind of preservation, because you don't want things to fall and break while you are out on education outreach. You do education outreach. So, you know, independence is a busy time for cultural agencies. So you go out, you do display, you do public education. So you do everything. You really have to be a jack of all trades. I have to be more so now. And I do have to work regionally. So it requires me to be very collaborative in the work that I do, to work with different holders of collections, with different histories, different subjects, and different policies guiding different levels of it. And I have to write policy, and so I have to do everything.
Sounds like a lot. All right, so we're coming to the end of this interview, and so what I do is I usually ask for tips. So first of all, tips for someone who knows that you find a strength when you're young, and maybe your strength isn't what's traditionally lauded, maybe, or it's not an obvious strength. What's a tip that you have for someone with that situation?
Okay, so I would say that relationship building is important. So you have to okay, so the thing about living in the Caribbean is that we all live in these social bubbles, right? I would never advise someone to return home who has not maintained a network. You have to maintain relationships.
All right. All right. I'm interrupting because you kind of got into the next question, but I like that you said it because so everybody has to answer 3 tips for repatriation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you want to answer that, you can answer that because I feel like that is one of the tips.
Well, that to me is the most important one.
Okay.
For me, the most important one is maintaining relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean maintaining relationships because this person might give you something.
Yeah.
It's maintaining connections to home.
Yeah.
Right? Because that is in essence what helps you get a foot in the door. That's what helps you to land on your feet. That's how people it opens these doors for you. Mm-hmm. Somebody always knows somebody who might know something mm-hmm. that could recommend, right? And you also need that network to carry you through disappointment.
Yeah.
When you think you can do something a particular way and it doesn't work out, that's the community that's gonna sit with you while you cry mm-hmm. and then say, okay, let's try this one instead.
Okay.
Right? But I don't think I have 3.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think I have 3.
That's fine.
Because I think it's for some people it's easier to return home than it is for others.
Okay.
For me, I didn't live in the US for that many years. And even when I was in grad school, I was coming in and out of the Caribbean. So I maintained my relationships with people in Trinidad, in Barbados, at home. I maintained my relationships at the Institute of Jamaica. And so it really very often allowed me to have a soft landing. I would say I was going to say collaboration, but that's also a network thing. Mm-hmm. I was going to also, you could do targeted, my thing is just networking.
Yeah, absolutely, that's fine. One is fine.
Yeah, network, for me it's network.
Yeah.
And being able to have a buffer upon return. Yeah. For me, I benefited from having just stable family presence. Yeah. I could always just pack up my stuff and come back home. There was nobody who was going to tell me, you need to pay rent, or they expect you to put gas in the car, they expect you to wash dishes, they expect you to live like an adult in the house and respect their boundaries. Yeah. But I always had a buffer. Okay. Even when the salary wasn't good, I always knew where the next meal was coming from. I always knew that I would have support. Yeah. And that makes it easier. When you don't have that, I think immediate return is not these kind of blanket jumps that I did where I just packed up everything and came back. I wouldn't advise that.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say that if you want to return and you know things are not so comfy, just do a very slow, gradual build.
Sure.
And in order to do that.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then we usually end on that, but you seem to have dealt with some loss, like people who have transitioned, mentors, others, and so on. Do you have any tips for anyone, especially when it involves, moving away, stuff like that?
Tips. I think allowing yourself to grieve is one. I spend a lot of time reflecting. I have friends or persons in my communities who would do libations, who would memorialize, on a day. They do a lot of active keeping that person's memory alive. But the thing about grief and loss is that life still continues. So I think I allow myself the discomfort of grief or the comfort of grief. I don't know. And I reflect, and then I acknowledge and talk about their interventions in my life and the impact, and I I value them, like I have children and stuff, so I have to move forward. So I celebrate them and what they've done for me, and I talk about it and I share it, and I think I have gratitude for being able to be with them. In many ways, they're not my parents or whatever, so I think that's a different type of grief. But for me, I've kind of I give myself that time. I'm kind to myself at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last question is about you're very good at narratives. And I know you're working on a monograph. Do you tell us about that, and also if you'd write fiction? Because I want to hear you read like a story that you wrote.
I don't write fiction.
Don't
My
write fiction?
siblings write. I don't write,
okay.
actually.
But you have a good like reading voice, like you're telling a story.
Oh no, well but I do storytelling.
It makes sense. Yeah.
History, storytelling. Museums are storytelling.
I agree.
So I tell stories. I write stories.
Fair.
I write history. I'm working, so I'm doing multiple things, but my monograph, because my historical research is actually on institutionalized childhoods. And so I'm writing a monograph on institutionalized children between 1858 and 1950. 1858, 56, 58 is the passage of the Repatriation Act. 51 is the passage of the delinquent juvenile legislation. And so I'm using the experiences the records, they're all snapshots, but the records on children who were placed in industrial schools and orphanages between that period, where the archive is still accessible. It's after the passage of the juvenile legislation, the nature of how children are regulated when they're in conflict with the law or in need of care changes. And so I'm looking at a series of archives in which children show up, and but they're children who are in homes, in industrial schools. Reformatories become industrial schools. Industrial schools become approved schools. They are today often referred to as juvenile rehabilitation centers. But I look at that development over time and the tensions that happen between the children and the persons who are responsible for their care. And I work through what guardianship means in the case of the state. And I talk about where the money comes from to take care of them. And I talk about what their vulnerabilities are as wards of the state. So I'm working on that. That's not immediate. Right now I'm doing lots of museum policy, repatriation stuff. But I move, I guess I move between the genres because museums requires a different kind of thinking through and writing. So I've ended up being an academic while running away from being an academic.
Yeah, especially when you're the only of your kind, because you've tried to.
I'm not sure if I'm the only of my kind. I just think I function. No, I'm not. I just think that the space I've carved for myself has given me some freedom. There are others of me, my colleagues.
I said what I said. I'm not trying to discredit anyone. Your experiences, your interests, your education, your experience make you one of a kind.
Oh, okay, thank you. But yes, I appreciate Donna because Donna made me or encouraged me to be fearless.
Yeah.
In choosing my commitments, because it is by choosing to be in the region, because I probably could go back to the States at some point, but by choosing to be in the region has actually allowed me to grow intellectually, in a way I may not have been able to in the US. And then the other thing is that I'm actually functioning more in European context than I am in US context. But I, it has made me, the decision to return home was the right one for me because it allowed me to find my place, but also to be more, it really required me to push my wings, to stretch my wings, to be uncomfortable, to learn new things, and in that give me a worldview that enhances. And coming out of it, I felt increasingly that as Caribbean practitioners, especially in museums, that our voices need to be heard more. And so we actually have to write more. And for me, it's actually an activist approach, because if you don't, other people will write you. They will write about you. They will, and this happens in heritage, they write about you, they cite you, but they become the specialists. And for me, that's just a complete no-no. And I think functioning in history and in my history training has made that so visible to me. Like, I see it immediately. Like, I'm like, no. People like, oh, so-and-so is coming. I was like, no. You're the specialist? No, if you're the specialist, they need your knowledge. So you need to write either in a magazine or something.
Right.
But you need to write, and writing ultimately becomes almost still the most important tool in your arsenal if you're gonna center Caribbeanness over any other perspective. So I'm happy she encouraged me to stay. I still applied to jobs, and I just at some point stopped and stayed, and actually really mentally stayed. And I recognize that staying actually requires me to be very agile. So, I have to be agile, but I'm here. Yeah. And I'm present. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not thinking I'm gonna run off somewhere. Yeah.
I don't have anything else to say. That sounds great. That sounds like a great summary of why someone would choose to be here. Someone like you, in a specific field that is also a broad field because of all the things that you do. Is there anything else you want to tell, say, share?
No, I think that persons who want to come home should avoid romanticizing home. Home is not romantic. Jamaica is not a romantic place. It's not tourism, right? You're not going to the beach. You're not going to a hotel. If you're coming back to Jamaica, you need to be very, very clear about what it is that you're doing. And acknowledge that by making these changes, you're either making a decision for quality of life or a decision about career, right? But you have to be very, and I would say do some research if you can about your area. But romance is not, Jamaica will eat you alive if you're romantic about it. You need to treat Jamaica like the beast it is. Be honest about it, and then step out on faith. But do not ever romanticize it. That's mine.
I'm smiling just because you gave like another Tiffany said he didn't have any more. But no, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to see more about your monograph, whenever that is, and all the things that you're working on coming out, and all the side quests that you're on with the repatriation work and stuff. Incredible, needed work. And I hope you all learned something today. We'll see you next time on Repat Stories.